Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. Every week I get to talk to interesting CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of ranging companies from Netflix to Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And my guest this week is Kelly Campbell. She is a conscious leadership coach, helping creative and technology leaders transform their lives and grow their agencies. She's the co-founder of Consciousness Leaders, a global collective of experts helping organizations create positive, lasting change. She's also the host of the podcast, Thrive, Your Agency Resource, and she's currently authoring her first book on redefining leadership as a healing journey. And of course, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25 Media, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And Kelly, you started podcasting back in 2006, about 4 years before I started podcasting. I have to ask you, what was that experience like? What was podcasting like in 2006? You were a super early adopter.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today, John. I'm really excited to be here. Podcasting in 2006 was a very, very different landscape. If you were not tech savvy, you were not podcasting in 2006.
No.
So you had to be super comfortable editing XML files and accessing root server directly and all of that nice techie geeky stuff. I did that as part of a company that I had started in 2006, right around that time, called The Holistic Option. And we'll get into that probably later. But what was it like? It was really interesting because I was able to, at that point, get guests that I would never have had access to before. So, I mean, I was talking to Deepak Chopra's daughter. I had Mayim Bialik on because she was part of the Holistic Moms Network. I had access to be able to have these incredible guests on the show that today it would be like, oh, you're just another podcast? No, I'm going to pass. But back then it was such a new kind of trend and fad that people were really willing to talk to me for an hour.
And they knew what it was, right? You explained what a podcast was, or they knew what a podcast was?
They sort of knew what it was. Okay. Yeah.
That's good.
Particularly the people that I was talking to. Yeah. It was a wild, but it was really great. And we ended up at, I think it was #1 on iTunes in the health category for a solid year. Wow. Which I'm like, oh my God. I mean, I really didn't know what I was doing. I just showed up and talked to people through Skype and the eCam recorder extension or whatever it was.
eCam call recorder. Yeah.
eCam call recorder. Yeah. And that was it.
That was like early Zoom. Yeah. Right. That's very cool. All right. Well, so to wrap that up, email us at support@Rise25Media or check out Rise 25 Media if you want to learn more. Kelly, it's such a pleasure to talk to you. And I want to start with a piece of your journey, which is you were 22 years old when you started your company. You ran it for 14 years. This is your cause marketing agency, but 22 years old when you started your company. What was that experience like? When I was 22 years old, I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea. It took me, I think I was early 30s when I finally became an entrepreneur. But for a woman and everything, how was it running your own company?
Okay. I'm gonna pause my reaction to the for a woman comment.
I only meant that in the sense that I didn't mean in a derogatory way at all. I just meant that there are fewer women that are entrepreneurs.
I think that in totality is true. I think that that's changing significantly, especially after the last year and a half.
So. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I'll back that up because I participate in Entrepreneurs Organization here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And our chapter actually has the highest female membership rate, I think, in the country. Wow. And it has been growing over the last few years.
Yeah. For me, I didn't necessarily set out to start my own company at 22. It was more of more of a situation where I got a full-time job right out of college and I realized that there was so much inefficiency. And also I was on the receiving end of a lot of sort of toxic behavior that I didn't recognize necessarily as toxic back then because we didn't really use
Didn't
that
have the
terminology.
vocabulary even.
Yeah. But in retrospect, it was really egregious, right? And so there was certainly sexism. There was certainly ageism because I was so young. I also had come out a few years before that. So there was definitely some homophobia that I was encountering and lots of misogyny. And so I didn't have those words at the time at 22. I just thought, well, this is kind of what the work life is like. And if this is what corporate America is like, I hate it. And so I'm going to rail against that. And there's got to be a better way. I thought that the work environment would be different. And so I thought, well, I don't know. I mean, I have a ton of initiative and a ton of drive. I think I'm fairly intelligent. This can't be that hard. And so I, on the side, built up a client base by literally calling companies in my county out of the phone book and setting up meetings, getting clients, starting to do, it wasn't called digital marketing at the time, but I was helping them with newsletters and websites and, really basic things at that point. And I got that running up and running until the point where I was making the same salary that I was making in my W-2 job. And then I gave notice, and that's pretty much how it happened.
Did you find, for those who are listening to this, who haven't founded a business, maybe they would think that it would be harder. Did you find that it was that you were able to avoid the misogyny and the homophobia that you dealt with in the corporate world by starting your own company?
That's a really good question, John. Avoid it? No. Not necessarily have to deal with it or accept it as just part of my daily. Yes. Right. Like as a business owner, especially in the early days, you take on whatever you can get. But for me, I had a pretty formative experience early on where I said no to that. I was like, if there's someone who doesn't want to work with me because of how young I am, or the fact that I have like an eyebrow ring, or if I appear as queer, if they don't want to work with me because of that, then I don't want to work with them. It's never going to be a good match, right? So I feel like I was kind of onto something from a boundary standpoint really early on. And I think that kind of set the trajectory for some of the work that we did as an agency, over the course of those 14 years as a cause marketing agency. If you think about, go ahead.
Would you say that because you were good at drawing those boundaries around the personal types of clients that you wanted to have, that if they didn't want to work with me because of who I am, I don't want to work with them. Did that help you then on the business side as well, determining like these are the types of services that we want to provide because we've been able to draw a boundary here, we can draw a boundary over here as well, which is a lot of times a lot of businesses struggle with that piece, with drawing a boundary around the types of services that they provide. Also
a good question. I think the answer is yes, but not immediately. So it wasn't until years later where, we were, I really detest the term full service digital agency because it's a misnomer. I don't think any agency can do everything. You're always going to need specialists and outsource, folks who are really great in the particular areas. But we were offering a myriad of different services. And I think when we got to the point where I was able to look at, okay, the people that are working on the social media marketing, as an example, they're spending so much time, they're burned out. We're actually not profiting from that particular service. I was able to draw the boundary to say, okay, we're going to remove that from our service offerings and find a partner where anyone who comes in and, is looking for other services that we provide, we're going to provide those services. If they also want social media marketing, then we would refer them over to this other partner, a strategic partner who would then remit some kind of, commission to us. So it just added a new revenue stream. And I felt like in some ways, I guess that was kind of setting a boundary or creating a boundary, although, I've never really thought about it that way. So it's interesting.
Yeah. And then How did you grow as a leader? And you're going into your mid-20s. Did you have others that you could look up to or learn from to learn all the different things you needed to know as a CEO of your own company?
I didn't. I really didn't. The closest thing that I would say that I had is my father was an entrepreneur. He created his own, he's like a master electrician, right? So he had his own electrical contracting company. So I knew what it was like to be in sort of a family of entrepreneurs, or at least a father who had his own company.
Yeah.
But I saw what he went through, and I saw how he treated his employees extremely well. All of his guys were union, so he had a certain, set of values and all of that, and that definitely trickled down. But I don't know. I don't know. I think it was. I think as a leader, I think you just try to figure things out as best as you possibly can or could. And to be honest, I think that because I didn't necessarily have that one-on-one mentorship, so I saw my dad, right, but I didn't necessarily talk to him about business in that way. I think the gap in not having a mentor, not having an advisor or a non-equity partner, not having those things also influenced my decision to become a consultant and then a coach to other agency leaders like I was when I was younger.
Right. What about peers? Were there other peers that were kind of that you could turn to at the time?
Yeah, a few. And they were both male and female. And I was also in a part of different networking groups, and that created some kind of peer support system. But at the end of the day, you still feel really lonely. You still feel like you're kind of questioning the decisions that you make. You're still the one who's getting up at, 3:00 in the morning, worrying about payroll and all those fun things that come with agency ownership. So yeah, it definitely felt a little lonely. And I guess I would answer, like, my leadership style definitely changed over the course of time, but that also would just be a matter of evolution as a person. Like, as I was getting older over the course of 14 years, you change from 22 to 36, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What about attracting good people to work for you? What were some of the secrets that you learned behind getting the right team members on the bus, so to speak?
So I think that also came down to positioning. About 7 years in, after we figured out that, like, the majority of our clients were actually nonprofits, foundations, CSR initiatives, corporate social responsibility, maybe some education organizations as well. There's sort of like an ancillary mix of the types of organizations and the types of people that work at those organizations. And I think when you have really strong positioning to say, these are the specific verticals that we operate in and that we best serve, it naturally attracts the people who also kind of resonate with those things, right? So if you've got employees who are sort of either specialist or jack of all trades in terms of digital marketing expertise, and they happen to also really want to work on things that are personally fulfilling or rewarding, they're probably going to have more of a social impact lean to them. And so just being authentic about who we were halfway through owning the company, I think that helped certainly to attract the right people.
Right, right. And then as you kind of niche down in this field, what are the sorts of decisions you had to make along the way in order to continue to deepen that way? In other words, did you have to fire other clients that weren't in that area, or did you just kind of like deepen your involvement with different organizations? How did you continue to go down that path and make it so that you were known to be the expert in that area?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think this is a misnomer. When we talk about positioning, I think a lot of people hear, oh, I have to niche down to like 1 or 2 or maybe 3 verticals. That means that I have to get rid of all of my other clients. I can never take on anything outside of those particular verticals. And that's a misnomer. When you say that you're well positioned in a particular area or ancillary set of areas, it doesn't mean that you can never take another client on that's outside of that, right? There has to be a business case for it. So we certainly, based on our relationships, because relationships are always the most important thing to me personally, as well as to the agency. I mean, I had, when I ended up selling the company, I had a couple of clients who had been with us since like the first 2 years of owning the company.
Wow. 12 years.
That doesn't happen.
Oh.
Right. And so the relationships were really important. And that also meant that that relationship changed, right? Sometimes clients would need a little bit more, or they need something different. Like we evolved with them. And so I guess, it really comes down to that positioning. And I forgot what your initial question was.
Well, it's just around defining, as you figured out what your niche was, how you continued to define for the rest of the world that this is what you focused on.
Oh, right. So no, we didn't. The quick answer is we didn't fire any of the other clients. What we did is, as some of them would naturally have attrition for lots of different reasons, right? Maybe they go into a different area, whatever the situations may be, right? We would replace them with ones that were in those verticals, expertise. Yeah. So it's not firing them, it's a replacement, Right. But no. And again, if there is some client that you want to work with that doesn't necessarily fit into those specializations, it doesn't mean no, you can't do that. It just means you've got to come up with a really good business case for it.
Right. You sold the business after 14 years.
Mm-hmm.
What was the motivation for that? Why did you decide it was time to sell?
I was absolutely miserable. My marriage was suffering. I was the first one into the office, the last one to leave, working on weekends. I didn't have great work-life balance. I call it life-work integration, but I didn't have that. I was just really, really unhappy. And so even though I loved our clients, I was really excited about the impact that we were helping them make in the world. I loved my team members. We really had a very strong agency from a culture standpoint and all of these other things that anyone else would define as success metrics. Everything looked great on the outside, but on the inside, I was really, really unhappy. And I felt like if I didn't make a change, I felt like it was really my only option, to be honest. It was that heavy for me. It was that emotional and that necessary for me. If I was going to live like in a way where I felt fully expressed and where I felt like fully like fulfilled and deeply happy, then I couldn't continue to own this agency. And I knew that. And I kept pushing it away and pushing it away. I probably knew that I wanted to sell or exit the agency for probably 2 years leading up to the acquisition, but I kept pushing it away and forcing it. And, that never works.
Right. You can't suppress it.
You can't.
And you had developed, you mentioned it earlier, the holistic startup in this period of time while you're running your agency. Tell us a little about what that was like. And also, I have to believe that it's incredibly hard when you have this one agency that's all time consuming to begin with, and then another startup on the side, that must have been really hard as well.
Yeah. So that was only about 3.5 years into the cause marketing agency when I started the holistic health startup. And, again, it was one of these things where you have a great idea, you put together the whole business plan, you really commit to it. And then start getting seed money from friends and family and pitch it to angel investors and VCs and all this other stuff. And the reality was in many ways, from a financial standpoint, it was a failure because it didn't generate anything. I wasn't able to sell it for, more than what I was able to bring in. So from those very, very stringent metrics, when you look at it that way, it was a failure. I think the lessons that came out of that experience were probably some of the most valuable lessons in my entire life, even to date. And I jokingly refer to that whole time period and that whole experience as sort of like the equivalent of my MBA, because that's pretty much what it cost me personally. I might as well have an MBA from Harvard based on what was expended there. But But honestly, some of the relationships that I still have, or some of the relationships that I have, are from those days. And I wouldn't trade the experience, because as a coach and a consultant now, had I not gone through that, I wouldn't be able to talk my clients out of doing things like that, right?
Yeah.
And also, if they have experiences that they're unfamiliar with, like pitching or like fundraising or all of these other things, I can speak to that from firsthand experience. So I don't see it as a failure. It was an incredibly difficult period in my life, but I'd like to think that I learned something from it. I certainly learned a lot from it, from the standpoint of not sinking a ton of money into a startup, which, just recently with Consciousness Leaders, which we'll talk about, I kept that extremely lean in terms of the startup expenditure. So yeah, that saved me a lot later in life.
You know what? That's one of the challenges of being an agency owner, is seeing opportunities all the time, or coming up with different ideas for different things, and wanting to, go after the new, develop the new. So what do you say to your clients now who are running maybe a profitable agency that's taking a lot of their time, but they come to you and they say, I've got this great idea for this other thing I want to do at the same time. Oh, no, I can balance both at the same time. I'll be fine. What do you say to them?
Well, I say pause. There's nothing's going to happen if you wait on this, right? And also, I think looking at all of the things, again, based on this first-hand experience, what I didn't look at with the holistic option was market demand, right? So the demand for those natural products and those services that were out of the conventional health realm, right? Like those were, for me, that was normal. That's how I lived my life. But there was not mass adoption of that, right? Now there's a yoga studio next to the Starbucks on every corner, but that was not the case in 2006. People were not, choosing to buy gluten-free products just because it was healthier versus if they had some kind of diagnosis of celiac, right? So grocery stores didn't have a natural foods aisle in 2006. There was not this mass adoption. So I think if I had done more market research, that would have helped me to say, okay, we're not there yet. Maybe I could put this idea for this platform off for another 3-4 years. And I still probably would have been first to market. It just would have been more acceptable, easier to raise money, all those things. So I use those anecdotes to help my clients just pause and think a little bit more clearly about, like, I get the excitement, but let's do this the right way. There's no rush. You
seem like a very determined person who's going to see something through until,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Persistent kind of person, going to make sure that. So how did you know when to give up, to stop? To sell the agency? No, I'm talking about the holistic startup now. How did you know this wasn't succeeding? I mean, I ran out of money. Plain and simple. I mean, so you literally did persist to the very bitter end. To the very bitter end. Yes. Yes. Also some lessons in that. I mean, I saw the writing on the wall and I pushed forward anyway. I had that, power through mentality. It was like, no matter what, I'm going to go down with the ship, and I'm going to force this to work. Force it to work. Yeah. And nothing works when you force it to work. Good lesson. Let's talk about, what you focus on now. So you sell the Cause Marketing Agency in 2016. And you say that you had kind of a spiritual awakening after that. It was a dark time for you because you're kind of figuring out who you are in the world and what you want to do. First of all, as for the sale of the business itself, anything you would do differently? Yeah, I would change the speed at which the process occurred, or that I allowed the process to occur. It happened too fast. It happened at warp speed. That's interesting. You rarely hear that. Usually you hear the opposite, that it just took forever. Yeah. And there's a reason why it takes forever, and that it should take forever. I mean, not literally forever, but because there's a lot of work. There's a lot to do from a due diligence standpoint. And honestly, I was so unhappy that I was, I had blinders on from that standpoint. I was like, okay, yeah, let's just get it done. Let's sign the papers, and
Yeah, it was at warp speed. I think the entire thing probably took 45 days.
Oh, wow. That's extremely fast then.
It was
Yeah.
extremely fast.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I would do that differently. And I would have done my due diligence, deeper due diligence, with the acquiring company.
Okay. And then tell me about what it was like after you sell it. Then you wake up, you're like, I've been a CEO since I was 22 years old. I
Yeah.
don't know what I'm doing with myself. Did you have an idea what you would do next, or did it take a while
No,
for you to figure that out?
it took me a little while. Yeah. I was in the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program at the time, had just graduated, sold the company within, like I said, the 45 days. And then I just helped some of my cohort members who were fellow business owners. Some of them were experiential agencies or printing companies, anyone in the kind of creative or technology realm. And they were like, hey, if you're not doing anything, can you help us with some of these things? And I said, yeah, sure. So that's what I did, just to kind of like fill my time and help them, because I wanted to serve. But it took me a little while to kind of find my footing. And so I just started asking myself these questions, like, what am I passionate about? Where are the areas where I feel like I can add value? What is my experience? What is my expertise? Who do I actually want to help? What do I want to do with the rest of my life? Like, almost like, what is my purpose, or what is part of my purpose, without being grandiose about it. And I kind of settled on this idea that, people who own agencies like I did, we don't have all the answers. And it would be really helpful if I had a coach or a consultant like the one that I wanted to become when I owned my agency. Maybe it wouldn't have turned out the way that I, where to the point where I was so unhappy, right? Like, maybe there would have been someone who could have guided me to say, you know what, you're not prioritizing your health and your self-care. How can we do this, right? Like, as the owner of a company, you are so, I talked a lot about how much freedom I had, but the reality was, John, I wasn't even able to take a more than a week's vacation in a year. And, the burnout and the anxiety and the stress just ultimately just got to me. And yeah, so that it took me a little while to arrive at those answers. And then I started consulting. And then that, I would say, within the first 2 years of consulting, pretty much led me to realize that coaching was actually the thing that I wanted to do.
Mm. You did all this work after you sold the agency, but in retrospect, do you think that you needed to, or do you think that you could have done it before? Maybe if you were guided or assisted.
If I was guided or assisted, I definitely could have. I may still have the agency today if that was the case. You're right. I mean,
Because
I don't like
maybe
to
you would have
play.
figured out a better life-work balance.
Yeah, life work integration, or maybe not, right? Maybe I would have figured out that I actually had a higher calling. Maybe it was that was the time period, like I was supposed to do this, own this agency, employ all of these people, allow them to kind of have a stepping stone into their careers. And then I was supposed to, go on and have impact in other ways, right? I don't distrust that. Like, I kind of trust the whatever is supposed to be aspect of the universe, if you will.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Did it take you a while to carve out your little? I don't mean little. Sorry, but to carve out the type of coach that you wanted to be, because you're very clear in who you're clear with the agency. You're clear now who you're for, who you're not for.
Yeah, it didn't take me long at all. So I figured out that it was going to be consulting initially, specifically for agency leaders. I did SEO was, my part of my background, part of my wheelhouse. So I looked at, what are people actually looking for? The term was agency growth consultant at the time. I created Agency Growth Consultant LLC so that the company name was, had the optimization everywhere. And at that point, I was probably only one of 10 people doing this in the industry 5 years ago. And now that has evolved pretty significantly. There's many, many more people who are doing coaching and consulting in the agency space, but I still have very, very little competition because there are not a lot of people who are focusing on the trauma-informed conscious leadership aspect of, what it takes to run a business and to become a more fully expressed leader and more conscious leader of an entity like this.
Yeah.
So I think there's one guy in Australia who does pretty much exactly what I do. We were just on each other's podcast recently, so that was fun to find someone else who's really on the same track. So yeah, I mean, the people who come to me are very self-aware and they're like ready to do some real deep work. And the people who are not ready, those people find other coaches and consultants that are more in line with what they're looking for. So I think there's plenty of work to go around. You
mentioned that you had this guy who you found as a competitor on your podcast. And this is a conversation I have with people all the time. I believe that there's a big pie, there's pie to go around for everyone. And but a lot of times other people think, I want to run away for that kind of person. I don't want to deal with them. So why did you decide to go on his podcast, he go on yours when he was a competitor? I'm interested to know what your answer is to that question. Yeah, I love this question. So it's the exact same reason that when I decided to be an agency growth consultant, I looked at the top 5 people in that who were doing that in the country, and I invited every one of them onto my podcast, which I have now, because I wanted to know what made them tick. I wanted to know what their specializations were. I wanted to know when prospects came to me and said, well, what's the difference between you and David C. Baker, or you and Carl Sakis, or you and Jeff Mead, or right? I wanted to be able to answer those questions, right? And so with some of them, I have very close relationships to the point where I referred a piece of business to Jeff and to Carl just this week. So, to me, there's always going to be the right fit. If someone comes in and, is looking for just straight up, like, I need help with processes and systems and efficiency, I'm not the right coach for you, right? I have lots of people in my sphere who I can say, oh, you know what, who's going to be the right one for you? This person. So it helps me to actually add value to prospects to deeply understand my competitors. And that's actually probably a perfect segue into talking about consciousness leaders, because if you look at the list of leaders who are on that website for the company that you started, a lot of them might be considered maybe a competitor to the work that you do. So talk a little bit about the inspiration behind starting Consciousness Leaders. Yeah, thanks. So Consciousness Leaders, that site launched about 5 months ago. It's essentially a representation agency for all of the people around the world who do all of this really important work under the precipice of, or under the guise of conscious leadership, right? So everything under, there's probably 80 different topics on the site, but things like diversity, equity, and inclusion, leadership development, social impact, empathy, vulnerability, you name it, right? So any of these areas where mental health in the workplace, all these areas where we're talking about valuing people and employees and the environment as part of profit, right? So all together, we're not highlighting profit or putting profit above people and planet. They're kind of all sitting as equal to one another. Even to the point, I would say that profit is the lagging indicator, that if you focus on your people and you make sure that you're doing right by the environment, you're doing right by the world and your community and the, everything at large, then profit will follow, because you will attract those customers who believe what you believe, right? So long-winded way of saying that the representation agency, I represent folks who have expertise in these areas, predominantly women, BIPOC, LGBTQ, and people with disabilities who have historically been untapped for their expertise in these areas. And they are coaches, consultants, workshop facilitators, authors, and speakers. And my role or the ethos of this organization is to match them or pair them with organizations who are in need of those services, or event planners who would like those people to speak at their conferences. Great. I want to ask you about, what companies do you admire that you feel, they walk their talk, so to speak, or they're truly authentic companies? I'll give you an example. Patagonia was just in the news the other day because they fired as a client one of their biggest clients in Wyoming, a ski resort, because they sponsored a fundraiser for a certain politician that they vehemently disagreed with. That's a company that a lot of people point out as they really walk their talk. They're environmentally conscious. What are some other companies that come to mind that you would say, are truly authentic?
Yeah, Patagonia is a great one. I like Gravity Payments. So Dan Price, I think, does a great job in terms of equity and really, sort of walking that talk. I think it's rare when people actually stand up for their beliefs and say, this is who we are in the world. We are unapologetic about it. There's also a really small company called Root and River that they talk about the work that they do as intrinsic branding, or that every brand is a spiritual experience. Well, if you don't resonate with that language, you're not going to be a great client for them, right? But if that language really resonates with you, like it would for me, I would hire them in a heartbeat just based on their tagline. And then you get to know the folks at the company, and then you'd really want to work with them. But I mean, I think I appreciate companies who are really genuine and really unapologetically authentic about who they are and what they believe in.
Yeah, I think we all do. I want to ask, given your background and the burnout that you experienced from your previous business, what do you do now to ensure that doesn't happen? You got two different businesses now, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you're super busy.
Yeah. This is really timely for me right now because I'm starting to feel that a little bit. Now that Consciousness Leaders is really picking up and we're getting tons of leads for the site and for the collective members. I'm in the process of hiring an executive assistant. And I really have started to prioritize my self-care in a way that, even though I have been doing that for the last, 5 years as a coach and a consultant, I'm really leaning into it pretty deeply. So I have probably for the last few months, I have a work schedule where I only work Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. I keep Mondays and Fridays for either personal appointments or just, like I said, self-care or working on the book, things like that, but no meetings, no client calls, things like that. A lot of meditation lately, walking. I know it sounds simple, but like walking and really breathing very, very deeply in a sort of an ongoing or continuous cadence where I'm like breathing in really for a long period of time and then breathing out for an even longer period of time while I'm walking. I got a brand new bike, so I'm doing more bike riding, trail riding.
Love that. I bike to work every day. It's great.
Yeah,
the best thing ever.
Yeah. So, I mean, lots and lots of things along those lines. And, I have a really amazing support network. I have two coaches myself who I've been working with for several years now. One is a Buddhist psychology coach and contemplative science practitioner, and the other one is a shadow work coach. So the combination of these two, for me, meeting with them on a weekly basis really helps me to kind of process things that are going on, or things that I'm encountering with a client, or something in my personal life, or just things that I'm thinking about, and I didn't, I think I go so far in the opposite direction than what I did when I had the agency. And for me, it works. It really works. But I think the executive assistant is definitely going to be a helpful addition to my team as well.
I hope so. Yeah. All right. Final question. I'm a big fan of gratitude. So if you look around, and you mentioned a few names already, but if you look around at your peers and contemporaries, however you want to define that, you mentioned Carl, who I interviewed actually a couple of weeks ago, David C. Baker, who I'm working on getting as a guest on the show.
Okay.
But however you want to define peers and contemporaries, who do you respect? Who do you admire that's doing good work out there?
To be honest, I would give gratitude any day of the week to my clients, because as much as I am their coach and mentor and advisor, they are some of my greatest teachers. I've had one coaching client in particular for 4 years. I learned so much from him through his journey over the course of these 4 years. And every new client that comes in with a different backstory or different programming or different enthusiasm or curiosity, I'm really, really grateful for how they show up and the fact that they're self-aware enough to say, you know what, I can use some help, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's probably, one of the greatest things that they can do for themselves. So I'm grateful for those clients and how they show up and how open-minded they are in the sessions.
It's great. Kelly, where can people go to learn more about you and Consciousness Leaders?
Oh, my website is klcampbell.com and Consciousness Leaders is at consciousnessleaders.com. So that should be pretty easy.
Kelly, thanks so much.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.